In this video, we're going to focus on opening up the front of the hip, working to activate our inner hamstring more specifically, as well as our inner thigh, as those relate to good core activation and allowing proper stabilization through the hip. Let's begin getting some pliability into our quadriceps, the front of our thighs and the front of our hips and those hip flexors. And then we will work on activating the joint capsules, then activating our hamstring in controlling our flexing or bending at the knee.
We're going to set ourselves up in this half kneeling stance for the hip flexor stretch. So you'll want a pad for your knee, a couple of yoga blocks. If you have a lot of flexibility, grab a stool. If you don't have a stool, then you can use the seat of a sofa or chair. Set yourself up in a wide split stance and square off your hips. Make sure you're next to a wall for balance and lower yourself down. You want to make sure your toes and your heels are perfectly lined up as well. Don't lean forward to get the stretch. Actually stack your shoulders over your hips, over your knee, and be nice and tall. Make sure your hips are squared off, and you should feel a stretch in your quad or front of thigh. So then you can also now find the end range for your knee flexion. So use the yoga blocks to help you. And if you have a lot of flexibility, then you can put the top of your foot on the stool or the sofa or chair. The only problem you'll run into later on is when we need to kick the stool away. You'll just have to reposition yourself away from the sofa. So now we're going to make sure we've got a nice stretch in the front of our quad from our knee up through the front of our hip. And so again, make sure you're stacked and your pelvis is squared off to the front. You don't want to have any arch in your lower back or rounding. So make sure you have a nice neutral spine, and we're going to hold this for 2 minutes. So make sure you're nice and comfortable. Let's take a breath in for a count of 4. And we're going to breathe out for a count of 8. This nice, slow exhale actually helps to calm our nervous system and prepare us for training. It allows that tissue to relax even further so that you can find more available motion by the time we finish with the stretch. Breathe in for a count of 4 and out for a count of 8. In for 4 and out for 8. You can bring the other leg across the front of you to help increase your stretch experience. So in the video, my left foot and knee would come across to my midline to help facilitate an increase in the stretch. Breathe in for 4 and out for 8. Breathe in for 4 and out for 8. Nice and slow. Don't rush this. It's a very important part. Breathe in for 4. Fill your belly. Feel your ribs expand, and then breathe out for a count of 8. Nice and slow. Breathe in for 4 and out for 8. Now we'll stay in this position to do our joint activations, or pails and rails as they call it in functional range conditioning. We're going to work on activating the back of the knee first, then the front of the knee, and then we will work on activating the back of the hip joint and then the front of the hip joint. We'll use a 3-second contraction with a maximum irradiation. So take a deep breath in, set your full isometric contraction, contract the back of the knee for 1, 2, 3, and relax. Reset, take a breath in, contract everything else, and now get the front of the knee joint. 1, 2, 3, and relax. Breath in, reset your full irradiation, contract the back of the knee joint. 1, 2, 3, and relax. Reset, take another breath in, full isometric contraction, contract the front of the knee joint. 1, 2, 3, and relax. Again, this is your maximum effort here. Breath in. Full irradiation. Contract the back of the knee joint. 1, 2, 3, and relax. Reset. Breath in. Full contraction everywhere. And now get the front of the knee joint. Contract it. 1, 2, 3, and relax. Let's move on to the hip joint capsule. And remember that tissue is really deep. So full irradiation everywhere else. And then you're going to contract deep in the joint. Take a nice deep breath in, set that full irradiation, and contract the back of your hip joint. 1, 2, 3, and relax. Reset, breath in, full contractions, and get the front of the hip joint. 1, 2, 3, and relax. Take another deep breath in, set that full irradiation, and contract the back of your hip joint capsule. 1, 2, 3, and relax. Reset, breath in, full irradiation, contract the front of the hip joint. 1, 2, 3, and relax. Reset, breath in, contract the back of the hip joint. 1, 2, 3, and relax. Last one, breath in, front of the hip joint. 1, 2, 3, and relax. Great job. So now we're going to move into our knee hinges. We need to actually open up our available motion here. So either move the yoga blocks, push the stool away, move away from the sofa or chair. I put the yoga blocks under my hands and get into a wide lunge here, using the yoga blocks to hold my posture. Work on maintaining a straight or neutral lower back by keeping your chest up and really extending through that hip. We're going to rotate the lower leg and then really contract the hamstrings, flexing that knee and squeezing at the top. We'll do 5 reps of that, and then we'll move to the other side. So take a nice deep breath in, set your full irradiation everywhere in your body. Rotate that lower leg to the inside of the knee and squeeze that hamstring, pulling that heel towards your booty as best you can, squeezing at the top and then controlling it back down. You're working to maintain a smooth, slow, controlled motion. Even if you have the range, you want to work on controlling the range. Really squeeze that at the top and maximize that hamstring contraction. Keep that lower leg turned to the inside so that big toe should be pointing towards the wall. Squeeze, 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 and then control it back down. Good. Tap and lift for 4. Squeeze, 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 squeeze. Good. If you're getting a hamstring cramp, that's okay. Keep working through it. It will go away and you'll learn so much faster. Great job. Squeeze, 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 and control it back down. Pause and rest. All right, let's switch sides now. All right, so your other side is along the wall and the opposite leg is stepped back. You're in this very wide split stance. You're wobbly, you need to hold on, making sure your toes are forward, and then you're just going to lower yourself down onto the pad, making sure your pelvis is also squared off and your shoulders stacked over your hips, stacked over your knee, so you have a nice stretch. And then we're going to find that end range for the knee flexion, whether that you need to put your foot on a yoga block or a stool or a sofa. So you're in max hip extension, knee flexion, your pelvis is squared off, but you're not arching into your lower back. Just make sure that shoulders stacked over your hip is stacked over your knee. Get into a comfortable place, and we're going to hold this for 2 minutes. So let's take a breath in for a count of 4. Expand that rib cage and breathe out for a count of 8. Nice and slow. Let everything relax. Breathe in for 4. Out for 8. Nice and slow. Again, as the tissue starts to relax and release, you can move deeper into the stretch. We do want to find that end range extension in the hip and flexion at the knee. You want to scan the stretch, so move into a deeper position as you can, either by bringing the heel closer to the back of your hip, or you can move your front leg over towards the midline of your body to increase the stretch as well. Let's take a breath in for a count of 4. And out for a count of 8. Breathe in for 4. Expand that rib cage and belly. Breathe out for 8. Nice and slow. Don't rush this part. Breathe in for 4. And out for 8. Take a deep breath in for 4. Expand that rib cage and belly. Breathe out for 8, slow and controlled. Stimulating our vagus nerve here and relaxing our nervous system. Breathe in for 4 and out for 8. Nice, slow, and controlled breath. Okay, so now we're going to move into our pails and rails. So stay in this position. We're going to do that maximum irradiation with 3-second joint capsule contractions. Take a breath in, set a full irradiation, and contract the back of your knee joint. 1, 2, 3, and relax. Okay, breath in to reset, full irradiation, contract the front of the knee joint. 1, 2, 3, and relax. Breath in, reset your full irradiation, contract the back of the knee joint. 1, 2, 3, and relax. Okay, reset, breath in, full irradiation, contract the front of the knee joint. 1, 2, 3, and relax. Breath in to reset, full irradiation, back of the knee joint. 1, 2, 3, and relax. Breath in, reset, front of the knee joint. 1, 2, 3, and relax. Let's move right on to working the hip. Take a breath in, reset your full irradiation, contract the back of the hip joint. 1, 2, 3, and relax. Reset, breath in, full irradiation, contract the front of the hip joint. 1, 2, 3, and relax. Breath in, reset your full irradiation, contract the back of the hip joint. 1, 2, 3, and relax. Reset, breath in, full irradiation, front of the hip joint. 1, 2, 3, and relax. Okay. Breath in and reset your irradiation. Full safest and greatest. Contract the back of the hip joint capsule. 1, 2, 3, and relax. Last one. Breath in. Set a full irradiation. Contract the front of your hip joint. 1, 2, 3, and relax. Great job. All right, let's open up that range of motion so we can do our hinges. So get the top of the foot to the floor. Put your hands on top of the yoga block so you can get in that wide lunge. Make sure your lower back is straight, chest up, really extending through that hip. Turn that lower leg to the inside, and then we're going to contract that hamstring. Take a nice deep breath in. Set a full irradiation throughout your whole body. We've got 5 hinges. Turn that lower leg in. Squeeze that hamstring and pull that heel towards your booty. Squeeze, 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 squeeze at the top. And then control it back down. Just going to do a little tap of that toe and pull it right back up again. Squeeze that hamstring. Keep that lower leg turned to the inside so that big toe pointing toward the wall. Control it back down. We're working on getting a maximum contraction out of that hamstring. So squeeze it at the top. And when you think you can't squeeze anymore, squeeze some more. Control it back down. Tap that toe and go right back into contracting that hamstring, flexing that knee. See how much further you can get that heel towards the back of your hip. Good job. Tap. And last one. Pull your heel up. Squeeze, squeeze, squeeze that hamstring. Keep that core engaged. Full irradiation. Make sure you're breathing. Tap it down, pause, and relax. Great job.
This next training is going to have 2 parts. One is going to be working on the joint capsule rotation of our hip. So the upper leg, and trying to disassociate that motion from the motion of your pelvis so we can really make an impact in that joint capsule. Then we're going to work on strengthening or activating the inner thigh and the other leg and controlling our hinging, our flexing and extending of the knee as it relates to our quadricep and our inner thigh while maintaining a contraction and engagement of our inner thigh.
To set this exercise up, you're going to lay down on your right side. Use a pillow, something dense under your head so your neck stays neutral. You're going to put one yoga block at the inside of your left thigh so that your knee is hanging off and your foot will relax down towards the floor. I use the other yoga block just to press against the pelvis so I can get some feedback whether I'm moving that or not, because we want to isolate that thigh at the hip joint. We're going to do a maximum irradiation and we're going to try to lift that foot towards the ceiling. Set your foundation and very slowly try to isolate, rotating the thigh towards the floor. Therefore, it would cause your foot to be raising up to the ceiling. You really want to feel this very deep, trying to isolate that motion. That's why you want to move really slow and deliberately so that you can really pay attention to what you're doing. These axial rotations are meant to target these very deep structures. So when you get to the top position and you're really trying to work to go further, but you can't go anymore, just pause. And you're going to reverse the motion. So then it's like you're rotating the thigh backwards or up towards the ceiling. So the foot's going to come down towards the floor. Now, don't rush this part. You're going to want to just quickly drop the foot, but control that motion. It's very important you do it in both directions. You're going to tap at the bottom, and then we're going to lift for our second rotation. We'll do a total of 5 of these. Really take your time. When you feel like you hit little sticky points, be patient there. Trying to slowly work through those sticky points, trying to regain control over that motion and activation of those deep tissue structures, those really important stabilizers of that hip. Pause at the top and then control it back down. You're working to develop smooth, slow, controlled motion. You can see I'm even a little shaky. I have some aberrant motion there, and I'm working to improve that to make it as smooth and controlled as possible. Really trying to rotate that thigh specifically within that hip joint. I've got that top block. I'm pressing down on my pelvis just to make sure that that's not rotating, so that I'm really isolating that motion from the thigh and the hip joint. Pause the top and reverse it back. Tap the toe and move into the next repetition. I'm just flexing and pointing my foot just to see what's going to give me a better control over this motion, a better experience of what I'm feeling within the hip joint. And as you move through the repetitions, you should be able to find small amounts of improvement and control at the end range there. So don't rush through that top portion. Spend some time there really trying to gain more motion than you did the repetition before. So we're holding this contraction specifically to develop more motion for that internal rotation of the leg in the hip joint. Control it back down. We've got one more rep. Tap that toe down. Move right into number 5. Stay with me here. It gets really hard, really challenging. Maintain the specificity of how you're moving so that you can maximize your outcomes here and your progress. You got it. It gets really hard at the top here. Really work on trying to make sure you're isolating that motion in the hip joint. Find some new range. You can do it. If anything's cramping, just tighten that cramp up. Work through those shakes. Work on getting smooth, controlled motion. Start lowering that back down. Control it right to the very end. You're going to pause. Then you can relax. Let's move into the second part of the exercise. I'm going to put the top yoga block actually in front of me so I can push down on it. And I'll move the other yoga block. I'm going to lower it from under my knee. You may or may not want to do that. So just play around with the modification that best suits you to make you most comfortable. So the bottom leg is going to be straight out. We're going to flex our ankle. We're going to actually lift that leg off the ground and then hinge at the knee, trying to get that heel to touch the back of our hips as best we can. not allowing that leg to lower. We're going to try to keep that knee hovering from that start point that we set. We'll use a full irradiation, and we're going to do 3 repetitions of this. Let's take a nice deep breath in, set a full irradiation, lift that right leg off the ground, flex the ankle, and begin bending that leg back from the knee. Try not to move anything else. Use that irradiation, that core activation, and then open up the knee, squeezing that quad. Keep that thigh up off the ground where you set from the beginning. Pause at the end point and go back into your second hinge. Keep that knee hovering off the ground where you originally set it. Bend that knee as much as you can. Squeeze that hamstring as much as you can. Now contract the quad and bring that knee back into the straight position. Shaking is good. That's where getting a lot of learning happening here. I'm getting new muscle fiber recruitment. Squeeze that hamstring at the back. Keep that knee up off the floor as you straighten out that knee. You've got it. Keep going. You're almost there. Awesome job. Control it down and relax. Let's switch sides. So your left side is laying on the ground, and we're going to put the yoga block under on the inside thigh of our right leg. So the knee's hanging off the edge, and that way the foot will relax towards the floor. You're going to have something under your head to support your head and neck. You can use the other yoga block in front of you or press it at your pelvis the way I was before as a way to give you some feedback to whether your hip is moving or not. Remember, you're trying to keep that thigh rotating in at the hip joint. You're trying to prevent your pelvis from moving along with it. So you can really feel those deep structures. You're disassociating that hip rotation or that femur rotation in the hip from the pelvis. So let's get ourselves set up with our modifications. Take a nice deep breath in. Set your full irradiation, your safest and greatest foundation. And let's rotate that thigh. You basically feel like you're lifting your ankle up towards the ceiling. And you're moving in a slow, controlled motion. Really trying to feel that deep tissue as the upper leg rotates within the hip joint. Pause at the top, and then you can reverse the motion. Again, don't just fall back to the floor. Control the motion, smooth and slow. Tap the toe. Move into the second repetition. Make sure you're not holding your breath. Even though you have a full irradiation and you've got the rest of your body in a full contraction isometrically, you don't want to be holding your breath. Really work at the top. Just because you stop at a sticky point doesn't mean you should give up there. Spend some time there. See if you can gain control over those little sticky spots. Control it back down. Smooth and slow. Tap your toe if it touches the ground. And keep rotating that thigh in the hip joint. Regaining that internal rotation of the hip. Even if you have full motion, you're working to gain control over all that motion, all the itty bitty parts of it. Pause the top. Work through any of those sticky weak points. Find new range if you can, and then control it back down. Next rep. Things might start to go into little spasms here, those little deep rotators. Just stay focused on maintaining your foundation and working to isolate that rotation in the hip. Really focus on that top point. That's where the magic happens. And control it back down. Tap that toe if you reach the floor. If not, tap that end point, and we're going into our 5th rep here. Find new motion. Things might be getting tired, so it's going to be a little more challenging to maintain the control, but at the top you should have some more available motion, even if it's just a tiny little bit. Every little bit counts. Control it back down. Don't give up yet. Don't flop that leg down. Tap the toe, then you pause, then you can relax. Great job. All right, let's move into the second part of the exercise. Almost done here. So just check if you can raise up that bottom leg, see if you have the range there, and you can adjust the height of the yoga block under your right leg to see what's most comfortable for your set foundation. Remember, we don't want to move that. All right, so get that knee straight, ankle flex, take a nice deep breath in, set a full irradiation through the rest of your body, lift that leg up. Start flexing at the knee. Keep that core in. Don't arch in your back. Contract that hamstring. Squeeze, 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 squeeze. Keep that knee hovering over the floor right where you set it before you started bending that knee. Good. And control it back out. Squeeze that hamstring. Every piece of this motion is very deliberate. When you get that leg straight, pause, and then go back into that hinge. All that shaking is really good learning. We're just working on getting better at controlling the smoothness and the slow, even pace of our motion the more we practice this exercise. The shaking is good learning. We're increasing our muscle fiber recruitment so we have more availability and variety to train in our other exercises. Contract that hamstring, pull that heel back as best you can. Keep that thigh elevated off the floor right where you set it. Keep going, squeeze, squeeze. Control it back, squeeze that quad. Get that leg straight, pause, then you can relax. Great job.